him and made his head ache. Samdevyatov came to see him. He brought him more vodka and told him of how Antipova and her daughter had left with Komarovsky. He came by the railway handcar. He scolded the doctor for not looking after the horse properly and took it back. Unwilling to leave it for 3 or 4 more days as Yurii Androvich wished, but promising to come back within the week, and personally take him away from Varykino for good. Sometimes, after losing himself in his work, Yurii Androvich suddenly remembered Lara as vividly as if she were before him, and broke down from tenderness and the sharpness of his loss. As in his childhood, when after his mother's death, he thought he heard her voice in the bird calls. In the summer magnificence of Kologreviv's garden, so now his hearing, accustomed to Lara's voice and expecting it as part of his life, played tricks on him and he heard her calling, Yurochka, from the next room. He also had other hallucinations that week. Toward the end of it, he woke up in the night from a nonsensical nightmare about a dragon that had its lair underneath the house. He opened his eyes. A light flashed from the gully and he heard the crack and echo of a rifle shot. Strangely, a few moments after so unusual an experience, he went back to sleep, and in the morning told himself that it had been a dream. 15. This is what happened a day or 2 later. The doctor had at last convinced himself that he must be sensible, that if he wished to kill himself he could find a quicker and less painful method. He promised himself to leave as soon as Sam Deviatov came for him. A little before dusk, while it was still light, he heard loud crunching footsteps on the snow. Someone was calmly approaching the house with a firm, easy step. Strange. Who could it be? Samdevyatov had his horse. He would not have come on foot, and Varykino was deserted. They've come for me, Yurii Androvich decided. A summons or an order to go back to town. Or they've come to arrest me. No, there would be 2 of them and they would have transportation to take me back. It's Mikolitsyn, he thought joyfully, imagining that he recognized the step. The stranger, still unidentified, fumbled at the door with its broken bolt, as if he had expected the padlock to be there. Then he walked in confidently, certain of his way, opening the connecting doors and closing them carefully behind him. Yurii Androvich had been sitting at his desk with his back to the door. As he rose and turned to face it, he found the stranger already in the doorway, where he had stopped dead. "Whom do you want to see?" The doctor mechanically blurted out these conventional words without thinking, and was not surprised when there was no reply. The stranger was a powerful, well-built man with a handsome face. He was dressed in a fur jacket and trousers, and warm, goatskin boots, and he had a rifle slung over his shoulder on a strap. Only the moment of his appearance took the doctor by surprise, not his arrival in itself. The traces of occupation in the house had prepared him for it. This, evidently, was the owner of the supplies he had found, which, as he knew, could not have been left by the Mikolitsyns. Something about him struck Yurii Androvich as familiar. He felt he had seen him before. Neither did the caller look as astonished as might have been expected at the sight of Yurii Androvich. Perhaps he had been told that the house was lived in, and even who was living in it. Perhaps he even recognized the doctor. Who is he? Who is he? The doctor racked his brains. Where have I seen him, for heaven's sake? Surely not, a hot morning in May, God knows in what year. The station at Razvali. The commissar's coach, promising nothing good. Cut and dried ideas, a one-track mind, harsh principles, and integrity, absolute integrity, Strelnikov. 16. They had been talking for hours. They talked as only Russians in Russia can talk, particularly as they talked then, desperate and frenzied as they were in those anxious, frightened days. Night was falling, and it was getting dark. Apart from the nervous garrulousness that was common in those days, Strelnikov had some personal reason for talking ceaselessly. He went on, doing everything possible to keep the conversation going, in order to avoid being alone. Was it his conscience he was afraid of? Or the sad memories that haunted him? Or was he tormented by that self-dissatisfaction which makes a man so hateful and intolerable to himself that he is ready to die of shame? Or had he made some dreadful, irrevocable decision, and was he unwilling to remain alone with it and anxious to delay its execution by chatting with the doctor and staying in his company? Whatever it was, he was evidently keeping to himself some important secret that burdened him, while pouring out his heart all the more effusively on every other subject. It was the disease, the revolutionary madness of the age, that at heart everyone was different from his outward appearance and his words. No one had a clear conscience. Everyone could justifiably feel that he was guilty, that he was a secret criminal, an undetected impostor. The slightest pretext was enough to launch the imagination on an orgy of self-torture. Carried away by their fantasy, people accused themselves falsely not only out of terror, but out of a morbidly destructive impulse. Of their own will, in a state of metaphysical trance, in a passion for self-condemnation which cannot be checked once you give it its head. As an important military leader who had often presided at military courts, Strelnikov must have heard and read any number of confessions and depositions by condemned men. Now he was himself swayed by the impulse to unmask himself, to reappraise his whole life, to draw up a balance sheet, while monstrously distorting everything in his feverish excitement. He spoke incoherently, jumping from confession to confession. This all happened near Chita. Were you surprised at all the outlandish things you found in the drawers and cupboards? All that comes from the requisitioning we did when the Red Army occupied eastern Siberia. Naturally, I didn't bring it here all by myself. I've always had trustworthy, devoted people around me. Life has been very good to me that way. These candles, matches, coffee, tea, writing materials, and so on all come from requisitioned military stores, partly Czech, partly English and Japanese. Odd, don't you think? What do you think? Was my wife's favorite expression, I suppose you noticed. I couldn't make up my mind whether to tell you when I arrived, but I might as well admit it now. I came to see her and my daughter. The message saying that they were here didn't reach me till too late. That's how I missed them. When rumors and reports reached me of your intimacy with her and the name Drive. Zhivago was mentioned to me, for some inexplicable reason. Out of the thousands of faces I'd seen in these years, I remembered a doctor of that name who had once been brought to me for questioning. And were you sorry you hadn't had me shot? Strelnikov ignored the question. Perhaps he had not even heard the interruption. Lost in his thoughts, he went on with his monologue. Naturally, I was jealous. I'm jealous now, for that matter. What could you expect? I came to this district only a few months ago, after my other hideouts farther east were uncovered. I was to be court-martialed on a trumped-up charge. It wasn't difficult to guess the outcome. I wasn't guilty. I thought there might be a hope of defending myself and clearing my good name at some time in the future, in more propitious circumstances. So I decided to disappear while I still could, before they arrested me, and hide for the present, led a hermit's life, keep moving. Perhaps I would have succeeded if it hadn't been for a young scoundrel who wheedled himself into my confidence. It was while I was making my way westward across Siberia, on foot, keeping out of people's way and starving. I used to sleep in snowdrifts, or in trains. There were endless rows of them standing buried in the snow all along the line. Well, I came across this boy, a tramp, who said he had got away from a partisan shooting squad. They had lined him up with a lot of other condemned men. But he was only wounded, and he crawled out from under a pile of dead bodies and hid in the forest and recovered, and now he was moving from one hideout to another, like me. That was his story, anyway. He was a good-for-nothing, vicious and backward. He had been kicked out of school because he was dull-witted. The more details Strelnikov added to his description, the more certain the doctor felt that he knew the boy. Was his name Terenti Galazin? Yes. Then everything he said about the partisans and the shooting was true. He didn't invent a word. The only good thing about him was that he was devoted to his mother. His father had been shot as a hostage, and his mother was in prison, and the same thing was likely to happen to her. When he heard that, he made up his mind to do all he could to get her out. He went to the local cheka, gave himself up, and offered to work for them. They agreed to give him a chance on condition he made some important betrayal. He told them where I was hiding. But fortunately I got away in time. By a fantastic effort and after endless adventures, I got across Siberia and reached this part of the country. I am so well known here, I thought it was the last place they'd expect to find me. They wouldn't suppose I'd have the nerve. And in fact, they went on for a long time looking for me around Chita, while I was hiding either in this house or in one or two others I knew were safe in the neighborhood. But now that's out, they're on my trail. Listen. It's getting dark and I don't like it because I haven't been able to sleep for ages. You know what a torment that is. If any of my candles are still left good, aren't they, real Tala? Then let's go on talking for a bit. Let's go on talking for as long as you can stand it, right through the night, in luxury, by candlelight. The candles are all there. I've opened only one box. I've been using the kerosene, which probably you also left. Have you any bread? No. Then what have you been living on? But what a silly question. Potatoes, of course. That's right. Any amount of those. The people who used to live here were good housekeepers, they knew how to store them, they're all safe and sound in the cellar, neither rotten nor frozen. Strelnikov suddenly switched to the revolution. 17. None of this can mean anything to you. You couldn't understand it. You grew up quite differently. There was the world of the suburbs, of the railways, of the slums and tenements. Dirt, hunger, overcrowding, the degradation of the worker as a human being, the degradation of women. And there was the world of the mother's darlings, of smart students and rich merchants' sons. The world of impunity, of brazen, insolent vice. Of rich men laughing or shrugging off the tears of the poor, the robbed, the insulted, the seduced. The reign of parasites, whose only distinction was that they never troubled themselves about anything, never gave anything to the world, and left nothing behind them.